Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 51 for June 2nd, 2017. Hey everyone, Dan Rubino here, joined with Zach Bowden for the Windows Central Podcast. If you're new to it, we are covering all the Microsoft news that's happened this week, especially around the world of Windows 10 and related devices. This week we'll be talking about the Insider program. It finally had a major malfunction, and obviously didn't really ruin some devices, but we'll be going over that and the risks of the Insider program in there too. We'll also be talking about Windows 10 on ARM, which got some news this week at Computex, and we were there for that announcement. We'll talk about what that means, why it's a big deal, and what's coming next this year. We'll also talk about the Lumia 950 Vision, which was a neat commercial that was never released, but we managed to get our hands on it thanks to Zach's nice little sleuthing there. And we're also talking about what was a Lumia 960. Could that be the case? And what that's all about. Zach, how are you doing this fine Friday?
I am not too bad. I was suffering earlier today with some weird malfunctions with my PC where it forgot how to Bluetooth, and my PC doesn't know that it has Bluetooth anymore. So now I've had to plug in the world's loudest keyboard and mouse.
So I feel like we're going to live troubleshoot this on a podcast, but have you tried the device manager?
I've tried it. I've tried everything. It just doesn't understand what Bluetooth is anymore.
You removed the drivers and
reinstalled everything. It's just dead. So I don't know what happened to me. So I spent pretty much all day trying to troubleshoot that. But apart from that, pretty good. How are you, Dan?
Hanging in there. Speaking of keyboards, I'm still using right now the Surface Ergo keyboard. I actually bought a new one because the old one, I spilled a coffee on it and it stained it. And Alcantara does clean pretty well, but this was a black coffee with MCT oil and cinnamon, and that's pretty tough to get out. And it was bothering me. Speaking of Bluetooth, it's a really good keyboard, but still has quirks. So basically, every time it resumes from a deep sleep, I need to toggle Bluetooth because every once in a while I'll be typing, and like if I hit the T, it'll just go T like 1,000 times, and it's like no, and it would do that like for space. It's totally random, but as a writer, very infuriating. Luckily, it's a quick fix, but they still have some bugs to, I think, solve with this stuff. It does wake up from sleep now. When I initially reviewed this keyboard, I said you couldn't like wake up the device by tapping the keys, but now it does that. So they are making progress. But yeah, Bluetooth, we've talked about this before. Not quite the panacea standard we were expecting in the computing world. It's good, but like all things, it does have its limitations and not quite perfect. But let's talk about, speaking of failures, the Windows Insider program. Now, my sympathies for people on this are mixed. Obviously, no one likes to have this happen. I know the Insider team, they're going through a self-reflective period right now, and they must feel awful, right? I mean, no one likes to have errors of this magnitude happen. At the same time, I kind of don't care because I feel like if you sign up for the Insider program, this is kind of what you signed up for. These things this was always in the back of our heads as something that could happen. Zach, actually, before I get any deeper, tell us exactly what happened for those who aren't on the Insider program and why it was a big deal.
So yesterday, Microsoft were planning to release a normal Windows Insider preview build for PC and mobile, build 15.220 for mobile and build 16.203 for desktop. These builds would have been released in their normal branches, Feature 2 for mobile and RS pre-release for desktop, and they would have included some new things that Microsoft had been playtesting internally for about a week. If that rollout was to have happened, everything would have been fine, except something happened internally with how Microsoft handles build releases and how they scheduled into what rings and whatnot, where a number of internal development branch builds were put into the public rings accidentally. So if you was in the fast ring, slow ring, or release preview ring, some PC devices, I think they were 32-bit only because it didn't get far enough before it could reach 64-bit. So the rollout started, then Microsoft saw what was going on, stopped it before 64-bit machines were affected. So, but if you was a 32-bit machine, then Windows 10 would start downloading build 16.212 from an rs_edge_case branch. Now, this is an internal branch that was never intended to see anywhere outside of Microsoft walls. Really, this is where they do all their like hardcore coding and like raw stuff and all like. Any like raw features or like code that's just got into these builds are in here, and so this is where the code could be its most roughest and buggiest. On PC, this wasn't that big of a deal because if the build downloaded and installed, you could actually install it and it would boot into it, and you would be continuing as you would. And Microsoft even says this in their blog post. If you did take the desktop build, you can roll back. We suggest you roll back, but if you don't want to, you don't have to, because the next build that they release will, of course, supersede it and. It will upgrade from there on out. But if yours on mobile, you had a bit of a different problem. Build 16212 for mobile also started rolling out from an RS_IoT, RS_Xbox, and RS_devices branches. Now, these are, again, all internal branches, and obviously, judging by the names of these branches, these aren't really intended for phone. If you install this build, your phone would have entered a reboot loop, and there's no fix for that. If once you hit restart and it goes into the Gears area, it didn't even get that far. It would start booting into the Gears area, but it wouldn't make it. So you'd start, then it's stuck, and it tries to reboot just forever, and you are completely done at that point. The only way to fix that issue is to go through the Windows Device Recovery tool, which is what Microsoft has suggested. If you hadn't pressed the restart button yet, there was a kind of way to sort of trick Windows into deleting the update by setting your date forward by 40 years and restarting the phone.
But that's not actually true.
What do you mean?
So, because I did that, and I think all that does is it postpones the update.
No, it times the update out, because an update is certain. All the files have a certain amount of time which they can be sitting. And then once you set the date 40 years forward, Windows Update goes, this must be an old update. Let's give it a that and check for new updates. That's pretty much what it does. And so, yeah, you'll see if you did the 40 jumping in time update glitch thing, what would happen is you'll see that Windows Update will just error out. Sorry, something happened. And if you click restart, the update will no longer, it will disappear, and then it will check for updates and it will see that there are no updates and still are ready to go anymore. So Microsoft pulled all these builds pretty quickly. Actually, I'd say it took a few hours, which was kind of a problem. It took a few hours. Eventually, all the builds were pulled, but for some people, even the stable builds are gone. So if you are a normal person who wants to now join the Insider program, I don't believe you can, because they pulled 16199 for desktop as well, likely because they're still trying to troubleshoot the issues and just thought the best way to make sure nobody would be taking on these dangerous builds was to just shut down the system internally completely. And that's probably makes the most sense. But yeah, it was a bit hectic. Everyone was all running around going crazy. Oh no, my phones are being bricked and stuff. A few people woke up this morning with phones that were stuck in a reboot loop because...
actually, that happened to me. Yeah. Which is funny because I had paused it. So we as quickly as possible, tried to put out a how-to article on how to actually pause the Insider program to prevent this from happening, which would suspend it for 7 days, which was enough time. And I did that, but then in the process, I need to go back and get some screenshots. I unpaused it. And as soon as you do that, it immediately checks for updates. And so it started going. So then I shut off the Wi-Fi, and I swear, it found a way. Somehow, like I basically canceled it or, shut off the data, so couldn't finish downloading it. And that's when I started trying the 40 years ahead thing, whatever. But it still wouldn't, it would just said, like, we're having trouble, and it just kept doing it. And I thought it was fine. And then somehow this morning, I woke up, and my phone was just literally the HP logo just flashing every few seconds. I'm like, it did it anyway.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I kind of don't care. My photos get saved to OneDrive, and let's be honest, Elite X3 photos aren't things I necessarily need to save, because they're not very good. But, yeah, it's a pain. At the same time, I like the idea of starting over. I've said it before, if you ever want like a really nice experience, if you're having issues, just, reflash the device. And, it's unfortunate people had to do this, but this is the risk of the Insider program. Like, this was literally always a potential issue.
I mean, for insiders, this is a walk in the park. Obviously, a reboot loop thing is easy to be fixed. Windows Device Recovery tool takes 2 minutes, then you're back to a working phone, which can be updated back to the Insider program. On desktop, this is a similar scenario. Most desktop insiders on the fast, slow, or release preview. The only area where I can see this being a slight pain in the backside is if you was in the release previewing, where you all of a sudden got a full build, which for the most part doesn't happen in the release previewing. You only get full builds once or twice a year, except yesterday you got a surprise, really buggy in development build in the release previewing, which is kind of where the issue sort of lies for you. But if you're in the fast or slow rings, I think you can get by with it.
And at least on PC, we posted a tutorial about you can actually. It's just a good tutorial to go read. It's still on the front page there if you want to. If this ever happens again, you can actually go through and delete the temporary installation files from Windows from the PC itself, and basically wipes out that pending update. So if you say you downloaded it, it's like, just restart and we'll take a. Before you do that, you can just go and you can read this and just delete the files and it won't have anything to actually install. And then you can go from there. So PC, obviously a little bit more powerful. Why, that doesn't exist on phone? Well, phone doesn't quite have the same file explorer structure and the same. This is like this tool that's used is the cleanup tool is like a really old legacy one. It doesn't look like, it's part of the old control panel stuff. So, but yeah, it seems like it wasn't all devices that this happened to too. So, it is kind of funny. Like all things, when I used to study neurology, one way we study the brain was how it breaks down. It's like you figure out how it works. And I feel like this is what the Insider program, we don't really know how all this stuff works. So it's kind of funny. It's sort of like somehow all these files got into the system, right? So it was something like Windows IoT for, Windows 10 was being installed to mobile, and then there was stuff going on Xbox, and it was all over the place. And it's kind of funny because as outsiders, we got a little peek about like, wow, there's a lot of like builds. There's a lot of different things out there. And it's also funny because it's like, why don't they just shut it off? Like there's like a button, right? And they just went click and it just, it's like a water spout shuts it off, but it's obviously not quite, I would say not even quite. It's definitely not like that. So even when they immediately try to shut it off, there were still things going out there for a while. So, it's a learning experience too for everybody. I'm sure the Insider team, from what I've, you told me, they've basically shut off all these, the Insider builds right now. So for instance, my Elite X3, which is now in the back here, it's back on the production build, but it's in the fast ring, but it doesn't see any more updates. So I can't go to actual fast ring. So they suspended everything. And it sounds like they're in this like, all right, let's figure out what went wrong here. And listen,
yeah.
They'll get better from this, right? They're going to learn from these mistakes. They'll put new, safeguards in to make sure this doesn't happen. But
the thing that I found most interesting about this was that the builds were also sent to production rings as well, which although they didn't install because there are some safeguards in place where usually Insider preview builds are signed slightly differently or have certain different certificates than production. So if you try to install via update, a Windows update say, hey, you can't do that. And that's pretty much what happened in this case for phones and for PC. PCs and phones in production ring saw this build and started downloading, but when it tried to install it say, oh yeah, sorry, can't do that. Which is a good thing, obviously, but it's still pretty interesting to see how that can happen. I would have thought that the Insider well, I guess not actually, since it is handled through Windows Update.
It's all Windows Update, yeah. So in theory, anything could happen.
It's a scary time to be living. What if it turns out it was a cyber attack? And somebody tried to destroy everyone's phones.
I mean,
terrible.
Just think about this. If this was in 1995 when Windows 95 came out, the Windows Insider program would have been a monthly subscription service where they had to send you 32 diskettes every month, and you would have to just manually install it. Yeah, I mean, this is, everything's a trade-off, right? I mean, we want everything instant and cloud-like, and, but with that becomes risk. So, it was a funny experience. I don't want to say funny, I couldn't imagine being on the Insider team. They must have just all went pale when they started seeing the reports come in. Especially they know that they can't literally flip a switch and just undo it, right? They just have to kind of roll with it and then try to triage as much as they can. It's a stressful time for a lot of people. It was unfortunate. Some people on Twitter were going after some of the Microsoft people, as is the world we live in this day, where, getting personal. And then, that's unfortunate too. It's I mean, I can say these things, they can't, obviously, to Microsoft, they have to be kind, and nice, but I can tell you, if you're in the Insider program, expect your device operate on the assumption this could happen, and don't complain if it does. It's like that's what you signed up for.
The thing that interested me the most about this is that it was for mobile. It was a build from the 16,000 range. So no longer was it a 15xxx build. It was a 16xxx build. So what's that about Microsoft? I thought they didn't exist. That's what you said.
Right.
You're liars. That's what they are.
But you know better.
Yeah,
we know better.
Yeah, well,
Because mobile kind of isn't dead.
Outrageous. Anyway, we should move on to our next story, which I don't remember what it is.
Windows 10 on ARM.
Yay.
So this is I still think this is the biggest story of the last year. But it gets into architecture. And I've written, we wrote about the announcement this week, which happened at Computex. So the big news there, actually, let me step back. Windows 10 on ARM is a big deal. So I wrote an article today basically explaining why this isn't Windows 10 RT. And for those listening and have no idea what I'm talking about, Windows 10 on ARM is basically ARM processors are what's found in your smartphone. And that's the architecture. So it's a type of processor that's running there. Versus x86 or x64, which is what is found in your PC and your tablet. These are the Intel chips. And this is why you can't just run phone stuff on your PC and vice versa, because they're just different systems. So it gets into this weird computational stuff. x64, of course, is a little bit more secure. And it can handle higher amounts of memory. Most modern operating systems are 64-bit now. I still remember when Windows was 32-bit only and went to 64. Very cool stuff. And so what Microsoft managed to do was get full Windows 10 to run on ARM. So this was announced in December of 2016. And it was a huge thing. I still remember the conversation with Microsoft. So I was like, you guys did that because it's just Windows 10. It just runs on the same processor it's found in smartphones, specifically the Snapdragon 835, which has enough power to basically handle Windows 10. And of course, the big news here is that it can also run desktop applications that are Win32. So there are no limitations here. You can run Photoshop on this stuff. So it's a really big deal because it opens up this world of new computational devices that are smaller and thinner. And so we saw more of this coming out of Computex this week, where Qualcomm got on stage and basically said, they showed off, first of all, what the actual chipset looks like, and they compared it to the competition, in quotes. And it's about 50% smaller, the board that is required to do this. And that's because what's neat about the ARM stuff, it's all in one chip. It's basically, you're going to get your processor, your GPU, your Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi, you get 4G LTE, all that is there. As opposed to PCs, where if you open one up, you see everything spread out, all over the place. If you want a modem, you got to add it separately. This takes up a lot of space. And so Asus, Lenovo, and HP were announced as the first manufacturers who are going to be releasing these devices later this year, presumably going maybe into early 2018. I could almost guarantee, we've talked about this before, that Microsoft will also have some sort of Surface device come out in the fall that will handle this as well. I still think this will be what is known as Surface 3 today. The old version will be updated to just Surface. And now we know they're kind of getting rid of the number system, so just calling it Surface would totally make sense, right? And that'll be a super thin device with 4G LTE connectivity. I find this stuff really fascinating because not only, so this stuff is first going to go to PCs, so 2-in-1s, tablets, even ultra-thin laptops. They're going to be able to hit, laptops are already at 2.3 pounds now, but in theory, they can get lighter, thinner, better battery life. They'll be instant on, so you just hit the button, and it's just boom, it's on like a smartphone. Also, longer battery life and all that kind of jazz. But what we are expecting, of course, is these form factors to change. Being smaller and thinner allows manufacturers now to try new things. They can use less battery. They have more freedom to experiment. So I do expect to see more creative devices coming out over the next 2 years. And this is a long-term project. So I think there's a lot. We don't know how an 835 actually performs running Windows 10. Some early reports say it's sort of like a compute stick. So probably like an Atom or Core M3, which is still pretty impressive. But that will only get better as these ARM processors improve. So, you think 2 or 3 years from now, an ARM processor should be super powerful. And Microsoft is doing such great stuff with Windows 10 with streamlining it down that it's only going to be lighter and thinner. So and then there's Andromeda and all this other stuff that's going on with Seashell. I don't know. I find this stuff super fascinating because I feel like it's really changing what we mean by computers, and it's really being forward thinking. No longer are they be heavy laptops or desktop things. There'll be these really small, light devices that are always connected, all day battery life, all that kind of stuff.
And as well, you've got to remember the whole moving to ARM stuff, which Windows is already on ARM. Windows phones are Windows on ARM. Right. Most of Windows phones are ARM-based devices. But Windows isn't one Windows. I know Microsoft likes to call it one Windows, but it isn't a truly universal operating system. You have all the different versions of Windows. Windows 10 Desktop, which is what Windows 10 on ARM is kind of mostly focused on right now, is the desktop version of Windows coming to ARM-based devices. Then you've also got Windows Phone, which is already on ARM, and that can run on x86 and 64 if it really wants to as well. You've got IoT, you've got server, you've got a bunch of other things, different versions of Windows, but it's not one Windows. It's different versions of Windows. But with moving full Windows 10 to ARM, and then over time bringing...
There's one core, right?
Right, so... yeah, it's one core, right. But Microsoft are also working on bringing, the top level to being more universal modular as well. And we'll talk more about that soon. But moving Windows 10 to ARM is just a step forward to their one Windows vision of a truly universal OS that hopefully we'll be able to talk about very, very soon. But yeah, I'm very excited for the Windows 10 on ARM stuff. And as Dan mentioned a second ago, he wrote a really detailed article about how Windows 10 on ARM isn't as secure. Now, I've seen many people confuse Windows 10 on ARM as another edition of Windows 10, just like Windows 10 Pro, S, and Home. There would be a Windows 10 ARM edition, that's not the case. Windows 10 on ARM is simply just...
In fact, someone's asking right now in comments who didn't read my article, will those ARM tablets only run store apps? And no, see, this is the point. Windows 10 on ARM is the architecture. It's not the SKU. That means it'll be Windows 10 Home, Pro, and S. In fact, watch all the videos that Qualcomm and Microsoft have showed with Windows 10 on ARM, and it's running Windows 10 Pro, which means, no, this doesn't run just store apps. It can run any kind of executable app in theory. And that's because of their emulation layer. So there could be, for education, market, Windows 10 S devices based on the ARM architecture. That's going to be something it'll be cheaper, lighter, thinner. That is definitely something that's going to be there. But no, these devices, you will be able to buy a Windows 10 Pro laptop that runs ARM. Like, that will be a thing. These aren't connected. The architecture is very different from the actual OS SKU. So this is not RT. Microsoft has learned its lesson from RT, and they never killed RT. And I think because they saw value in it, it just was executed poorly. But he took the best parts of RT, which is the security stuff, merged it into S, but also kept the ARM stuff too. But now it's just completely what this does for OEMs. This is why I think manufacturers are super excited. It just gives them more options. When they go to build a device, they can be like, we can make it ARM, we can make it x86, we can do x64, and then Intel and Qualcomm are there with all those chips and different price points, and they can go, we want this one, we want that one. Then they can go, we can run Windows 10 Home, S, or Pro. We'll pick this because it's cheaper and it's the target market. And they can create a whole new device, and they can basically hit a price point, and they can then vary that. They can be like, and here's one with Pro, here's one with S. And OEMs and manufacturers love that kind of options because they're not locked into a system. But and this is what the kind of point of my article was, for the consumer, it doesn't matter. Like, all this stuff is technical, and people are like, oh, my brain hurts when thinking. It doesn't matter. What's going to happen for you, potential customer, you'll walk into Best Buy and you're going to see just a bunch of devices that all run Windows 10. They're going to be 6-inch devices, 10-inch devices, 14-inch ones. There'll be the XPS 15 I use, which is, like this juggernaut that's super powerful. And they're going to range in prices from, a couple $100 to, almost $3,000. They're going to have 32 gigs of RAM or 4 gigs of RAM. So you'll always have that choice of hardware, but they all run Windows 10. And you won't have to think about anything. It's just going to be like, it runs an operating system. I install all the same apps, whether they're from store or executable, because even Windows 10 S, which we all know, that one is locked to the store, but you can unlock it so it can run executable apps still. So they really covered the gamut here. The question, the gap, of course, is mobile. And by mobile, of course, we mean specifically phone. And that area is still, question mark, right? But I think if you're listening to this podcast, you follow where everything's going, you can see how all these pieces start to come together to create what is a very powerful kind of device and ecosystem. It's still growing. There's still a lot of gaps to fill, but no one else is kind of doing this that's as united. They have one core, the underlying system. C Shell is going to unite the user interface so that you can go from like a phone-like device to a PC to a full TV. So that's going to be the front end. You have UWP, the Universal Windows Platform, for the app stuff, so they all run the same apps. Like when you put all that stuff together and then you throw ARM in there and x86, like, man, this is potentially pretty huge. Now, still got a few years to go before I think all this stuff is really glued together. But man, if you're not like connecting these dots, like you're really missing what's going on here. I think it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I am very excited for Windows 10 on ARM. It just opens up to a whole new market of devices. Like I can't wait for super thin, super lightweight laptops, because I mean the Snapdragon chips are tiny compared to Intel's chips, right?
50%,
so you can make
size.
so thinner devices, cooler devices. It's going to be really fun. And
yeah, I mean we're already starting to see fanless now. In fact, we can segue into that in a minute. Here we're talking about the fanless Core i5, but yeah, I mean, that stuff is coming out. And as someone pointed out, a comment, I mean, the beauty of the Snapdragon 835 is it's, I think, around 75 to 80 bucks per chip for the manufacturer. So that's what they pay, bin for it. To put that in perspective, a Core i5 or Core i7 dual core costs about $281, which is why when people go like, why don't they just throw that in there? Because that's a huge markup. Now, if you go down to the other end, Intel Atom and Pentium, they're around $40 to $70. And this is why I've always argued Intel has this issue where it's like 40 or 60 or almost $300. And that's your choice. And ARM fills in that gap a bit. It's a nice in-between price point and for performance. It'll sit nicely in between those. So that's kind of why they're doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. So about this fanless i5 you mentioned.
So Surface Pro 5, Surface Pro, but Pro 5, Surface Pro from 2017 introduces the Core i5, but now it's fanless. And this is a continuation. I have the Surface Pro 4 Core M3 version, which is also fanless. In fact, I'm going to I have an article come out next week talking about that, why it's still a good choice. I use the M3. So if you're going to tell me that the M3 stinks and 4 gigs of RAM is just not usable, you're wrong. I use it. Now, it's not my main computing device, but I do use it and have no issues with it. But that was the first fanless Surface. And it was a very exciting device because of that. It's quiet and all that. It doesn't generate a lot of heat. It surprisingly doesn't get more battery life. It's an offset with the chip and the way it scales. But new Surface Pro, fanless Core i5. Some people were saying, oh, that's just like the Intel Core M processor. It's not really a Core i5. They just basically did a swap here, and I wrote this article basically saying that's not accurate. This is a true Core i5 processor. It's a dual core. It's a U series, which is what's found in Ultrabook. So you get a Dell XPS 13, same processor that's in there. This is not the Core M, which is actually called Y series now. It is a full-on thing. They just did something with the thermals to basically hit, so it doesn't overheat and doesn't require a fan. Now, I did add caution here. This stuff gets complicated because a Core i5, when you buy it, there's the power rating, what's called a TDP, the thermal rating for it. And it's, I believe, 15 watt is the max it can go to. But these things are what's called, it's a variable, a configurable TDP. And so an OEM can go in there and go, we're actually going to run this at 7.5 watts and not 15. And they can actually scale up to 25, I think, too. So that goes both ends. You can scale high and low. And that changes, of course, the clock speed. It's just like overclocking, if you know how that works. It's the same thing. It's volting, So we don't know the TDP of this, meaning the Core i5 might not perform at its max performance. And in fact, we see that with the Core M3 right now. I believe it tops out at 1.5 gigahertz instead of, I believe, the 2.2 gigahertz that it's potentially could do. So this is what's called thermal throttling and all this kind of stuff. Now, for end users, they don't really notice this. If you're just launching apps, store apps, and all this kind of stuff, it'll perform at its max performance. It still does a turbo boost and all that kind of stuff. what happens is people get concerned about if you're doing like say gaming for an hour, it gets hot, it starts to regulate and down shift, and you get reduced performance. I've actually never really experienced this. I don't use my devices like that. I know people who like use a Surface to render video, which to me is insane, but people do that. Might see these kind of changes, and it's always a controversial issue with computers because even gaming laptops do this. They jam a quad-core Core i7 in there and a video card, and this thing gets like super hot, and after a certain level, it starts to down regulate. But we'll have to figure this out, right? When we get the Core i5 version, we'll do the test and all this stuff. But I'm expecting full-on Core i5 performance with this. So I think it's the best value, to be honest. If I had to pick the Surface and get one, I would get the fanless Core i5. It's having a silent tablet like that is awesome.
Yeah, I got the Surface Pro 4 when that came out. I got the M3 because it was fanless. I was like, yeah, that's totally cool because I'm not going to use the Surface Pro 4 for anything super crazy. But now that there's a Surface Pro, Intel i5 option, that's pretty impressive. And if it doesn't throttle as badly as you say, then that's actually going to be pretty productive for a silent device.
Someone's asking about why not use the M5 and M7. So those are options. Actually, the M7 is super expensive. It gets to do the M stuff. They do make the chips a little bit smaller. They cut some areas. It's basically a different manufacturing process for some of them. And so I know the Core M7, I believe it's over $300. I think it's like $350 or something like that. It's actually more expensive than the standard Core i7. There are also other things. The Core I's, a lot of them have vPro and advanced stuff for remote device management and security that aren't on the M series. And so this all has to do with the price points. Also has to do with the turbo speeds and how high they can go. There's also, of course, like I said, the CTDP, how much they can configure them. And so so you can basically, here's how I think of it is, the Core i5 they put in there, even if they regulated it and vary the TDP, is still going to perform better than, say, the Core M5. Otherwise, they would have probably just used the Core M5. But this allows them to get performance between a Core M5 and like a Core i7, right? It sits in between there. So that's what's cool about this stuff for the OEMs. But there are reasons. If you can go through Intel's Arc system and actually compare these chips directly, and you can see that there's like a lot of these like little tiny differences in there, which again, for the average consumer has no bearing, but for OEMs and manufacturers, it really does. So,
sorry, I'm banning someone. Shall we move on to our next story? The Lumia 950 and its original vision. So, a little bit of backstory here before we jump into the actual main story. Back in 2015, I wasn't at Windows Central at the time, but Windows Central wrote a bunch of things on the Lumia 950, the next flagship of the Lumia line, and ultimately the last flagship of the Lumia line, that was going to be pretty interesting. It was going to launch with Windows 10 Mobile, as it did. It was going to be a Snapdragon, two versions, a standard size and a large size, as it did. Snapdragon 808, 810, 3 gigabytes of RAM, QHD screens, all of that good stuff. Was it QHD? I can't remember now. Anyway, turns out that the 950 launch we got wasn't the full story, and Windows Central did write a bunch of articles on this. The original idea for the 950 was for it to launch with a pen and some smart covers, and it was going to do some other stuff as well, which we'll talk about in a second. So the smart covers are going to be pretty interesting. They basically act like the smart covers do on the Galaxy series, is it? Where the top half's cut out and it's got like some details that come up on the screen and stuff. And then the pen support.
Asus has done that too.
Oh, yeah. And then the pen support on the 950 was going to be just like the Surface Pen. It was a Surface Pen. You pick up the pen, you write on the screen in OneNote or whatever, and it works like you would expect. It was going to be a mini note-taking device. That would have been pretty awesome. Of course, those things didn't happen. Not only that, there was another thing. Windows Central last week was we obtained a video, an internal video that Microsoft had created back in early 2015 that highlighted what their ultimate vision was for the 950, which included, again, the pen and something called Active Sides. Now, this is something that I don't think many people knew about, but the Lumia 950 series was going to include similar sort of gestures that the Lumia McLaren did. It wasn't going to include the screen stuff where you could hover your finger over a tile and it would explode, but it was going to include some of the stuff, some of the side gestures and some of the side sensors that allowed the device to be able to record things such as being held or rotating the device and knowing when to turn the screen on and off or lock the rotation of the screen and whatnot. That was all part of the Lumia series as well. This was also cut just through development. So we had a whole thing where we had a video where it showed all of this stuff, and what it basically did.
It's a very polished video too.
It is.
Right? I mean, a lot of people saw that and been like, "That should just been the commercial."
Yeah, and I mean, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I imagine that's why it was created. It was going to be one of their commercials for it, but since most of the stuff in the video got cut, they had to pull that video, and then we were left with nothing. Pretty much. But yeah, so it's interesting to see how far along the development of the Lumia 950 was supposed to go before Microsoft ultimately decided to retrench their mobile efforts and start.
And we don't know what, like, I'm still curious of, like, what was the decision-making process? Because I ended up finally posting some of our images that I had from when this device was, before it was announced. I was saying it was, it's going to have a smart cover, it's going to have pen support. I didn't share those images because they were too sensitive, but now it's been so long. I was just like, okay, so if you go there, you'll see some internal marketing images for this device where pen and the smart cover was shown. But we don't know why this stuff was cut. If it was a cost thing, if it was, they couldn't, I mean, it very well could have been that they just never got it working or they couldn't hit the release time for October that they needed to. I don't know. It's one of those, we'll probably never know what happened with that whole
and it's just sad because obviously from what Microsoft's original plan was for the 950, it was going to be the ultimate Windows phone. It was going to be basically a mini Surface. And I wouldn't have been surprised because you don't see any Lumia branding in that video. I would not have been surprised if their original idea was to call it a Surface or eventually bring it up to being a Surface, because it basically was. It had pen support. It had all these cool sort of gestures that differentiated it from other products in the same market. It was a really nice idea for a phone, but then obviously it all got cancelled and cut and whatnot, and then we were left with phones that when launched were incredibly buggy and just built really poorly.
I have a theory.
Go for it.
I think Panos and his team saw it and were like, no, I'm serious, because that was under his division technically at that point, right? He inherited those phones and they came in, and I think he was just like, we'll release these. I don't want to associate them at all with the Surface line.
I imagine,
as soon as you put that Surface Pen, right? Because they actually use a Surface Pen on this phone. It's just like, ding, like, how do you not get away from calling this a Surface phone, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think they took that out, and some of the other things might have been just cut for budget reasons or other things. But I think they basically, and I wrote this article, like, go back to the day after, I was just like, Panos and his team announced these phones, but they were clearly distancing themselves from it. Like, they got on stage, they said what they had to. They were not like, this was not our vision of a phone. We'll put these out there, but this is not our thing. I still think that's true. I think they have very high standards. They want to do something, very unique and groundbreaking. And I think they're very worried about, selling the Surface brand, right? They don't want to put something out there unless they fully believe in it, which makes laptop super fascinating. I think laptops are going to be fantastic. I'm actually pretty much convinced it'll be my favorite laptop, but it's such a weird play for them. But and then now they segue into the 960. Is this actually called the 960? Do we actually know that, or are we just calling it that?
We were just calling it that because it's easier. But no, basically this week, images of what appears to be a very high-end Lumia device leaked. And this is a real device that was built internally at Microsoft that was codenamed North Star. And I don't know if we've read about North Star before. We shouldn't have, because it's not really something to write about. Basically, North Star was an internal engineering prototype that Microsoft used to build Windows 10 Mobile and, test software and whatnot. It was never intended to be a product that was to be released. The only reason these images have leaked this week and why it gained traction was because the phone itself looks really nice. It's a metal phone. On the front, it has front-facing speakers. It was featured a QHD screen, Snapdragon 820 inside, 4 gigs of RAM, I think, or 3 gigs. And yeah, it would have been a pretty well-rounded phone if it were to be released. But as far as I'm aware, and from me speaking to sources, this phone was never supposed to be a phone that was ever going to hit the market, which is unfortunate, of course. But
basically, yeah, I mean, it looked like the 950/XL with modest improvements, specifically, basically addressing a lot of the issues people had with the aesthetics of that device. Swapping out the back for was it curved?
Slightly
metal?
curved, yeah.
Yeah, it was slightly curved metal. Would have just gone miles for people to make that. Of course, then the question is, why happens to Qi wireless charging at that point, which is always a touchy subject for people. I would argue, although, as much as I love Qi wireless, I argue now that with Qualcomm Quick Charge, it's so fast that Qi doesn't feel as awesome. Like, you can just charge something through USB Type-C now that's so quickly, and that definitely would have had Quick Charge 3.0. Then it makes Qi. I mean, Qi's convenient, but I don't know. But yeah, it was a nice looking device. I didn't love the front. The front still had, one thing I don't like about the 950 and the XL is it's not very. I don't like the way it feels. It feels kind of still cheap.
Mm-hmm.
The glass doesn't feel as smooth, and it's very not oleophobic, so it picks up grease and dirt just a lot easier. But yeah, kind of a shame. So we've heard about this device for a long time. We've seen it referenced before. We never actually saw it. So for all we knew, it was just like this box, right? But we knew it existed because Microsoft had to test Windows 10 Mobile against the Snapdragon 820, so that they could partner with HP to make the Elite X3 and an Alcatel at the Ida 4S. Now, interestingly, we haven't heard the same thing, I don't believe, with the Snapdragon 835 yet. I don't know. Have you heard anything about that?
Nothing specific, but I do know that there are newer internal prototype engineering devices that they use to, build
because they haven't
Windows.
updated the Windows 10 Mobile guide saying what processors it support. They've cut things. They've cut a lot of the older ones, but it stops at 820, which is kind of interesting. But then again,
I think there's a reason for that. I don't think we're going to see any Windows 10 mobile devices on Snapdragon 835 handsets, and that's not to say, and that's not because Windows Phone is dead. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think what we're going to see over the next year is a transition from Windows 10 Mobile to a universal version of Windows, which again, like I said earlier, we'll talk
Windows
about more.
10 on ARM. Yeah.
Right. But it's an interesting time to say the least. And yeah, no, there's definitely, Microsoft do have internal engineering prototypes of what we would consider a phone that they still use and whatnot. But yeah,
it is kind of funny if you look at it. So Windows 10 Mobile doesn't support Snapdragon 835. But Windows 10 does. I don't know. Do I really need to connect these dots of where things are kind of going here?
Right. And again, we're not hinting that full Windows 10 is coming to phones. Again, not. That's not what we're saying. It's a whole thing, and it basically Windows on phone isn't going away. That's the point we're trying to make here. Windows running on phones isn't a thing that Microsoft have given up on. They simply cannot. Phones are too important in the 21st century for them to be giving up on it. That's like Google giving up on search. It's like, oh, we're done with search engines. We're done with it. No, it's not going to happen. It doesn't make sense.
So yeah, we'll just have to. This road is still coming. I don't know. I'm always, when covering technology, I've brought this up many times before. Consumers and even the media are always fixated on the next 6 months. What's coming? But I'm interested in the question, what's going to be in 5 years? Because to me, that's so hard. When I tell people, could you imagine what a smartphone is going to look like in, say, 10 years? The way things are moving right now, 10 years and a smartphone, I have zero ideas. We'll be at 5G at that point, of course. Will there be 6G? Will there be a world at that point? I don't even know. But like I'm saying, this is the problems, there are people in the world at all these tech companies, it's Google, Apple, who do have to think about these things, who, that's what Microsoft Research is doing, right? Microsoft Research this week just showed off a curved camera lens or a camera sensor that is more accurate and does better focusing and allows more creativity for devices. And they said it's going to be like a game changer and all this kind of stuff. Now, it's not small enough to be in a smartphone yet. It's also, they haven't mass produced it and all that kind of stuff. But this is the stuff that, these companies are always thinking about. So I don't know. I think mobile, people still think smartphones are like the end all be all and this is it, right? But the way things are going, it's just like, man, in 5 years, 5G networks with the computing power, we're getting with these new Qualcomm chips. I don't know. There's some very exciting potential thing. I mean, someday we will have to have holograms. Like that will be a thing,
I think it's also clear as well that we are also going to enter a trend at some point in the next 10 years of foldable devices. It's a matter of time. It is a thing that Samsung will definitely try and people will follow them. Samsung, I think Samsung will be the first. I think they said 2018 or 2019.
Well, I think Samsung and LG, who besides making phones, of course, both make displays. They're the leaders in display technology. Both have some sort of foldable thing. So it's a question of who can get to market first / who can mass produce that stuff without. I mean, if you remember when you buy displays, there's pixel rate failure and all this kind of stuff that they're always trying to solve. Surface has had issues with its displays, so displays it's hard stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? All people want is they want to basically have a laptop in their pocket, but they don't want it when they pull it out. It's like, okay, it's a phone. I want to use the phone, but they want it to turn into like a computer when they need it to. Like that is like, it's a form factor goal. Humans are weird. Like we want to type, but we don't want keyboards in the way when we don't want them. So it's like, how do you solve all these modality issues? It's not easy, but that is sort of the goal here.
And Microsoft already has like a baseline for this, and that's Continuum. Microsoft did try to go, hey, here's a phone, and then if you want it to be, it can be a laptop or a desktop as well. Now, of course, it's not as seamless as being able to just take a piece of glass and then fold it in two and then have like a whole thing. But it is a beginning point for Microsoft where they're laying out this foundation of a device that can be multiple things. And like we've said this many times before, Microsoft are working on lots of improvements to Continuum, windowed mode. Basically, what Continuum will turn into an extension in the sense that when you do enable Continuum on however you do it, whether you fold the device out or plug it into an external monitor, it just brings you to the normal Windows 10 desktop, and then you go from there.
Right.
It's gonna.
I was gonna say Continuum is people think about just the phone part of it, but they forget Continuum originally was for tablet mode with Windows 10. So the original the Surface 3 and everything like that, when he pulled the keyboard away and went to tablet mode, it could switch automatically. That was Continuum. That was an example of, again, the UI shifting for the environment. That concept, I really want to drill that home. The UI changing based on the environment is, I think, a core aspect of what Windows 10 and Microsoft is trying to do. You saw it with the tablet mode. You saw it with phones going to the computer thing. I talked about today in the article, I mentioned about gaming and how that could be Continuum enabled too. This is a big concept with Windows 10, and people really need to focus on this. This is what they're really aiming for, is the device changes based on the environment it's in and what it's trying to do. And that's really what makes a smart device.
And the future is going to be really bright. That's what I think.
Yes. Cool. All right. So that's the Lumia 960 stuff. Oh, well, that's technically the end. Oh, let's talk about the Eve, the E5. Is that the?
Yeah.
Or was it EV?
the EV.
The EV. Yeah. So we've been covering this for a while. This is one of the first crowd-funded, crowd-sourced, and crowd-developed devices. It is a Surface competitor. It fills, one thing I always tell people, you don't like the Surface Pro, you wish it had all this stuff. Don't worry, there's like 5 or 10 other clones out there that will do that for you. And this is one of those. And it's getting a very good feedback from people. So, I'm always, cautious of crowd-funded projects. You don't know what you're getting into. And sometimes they're cool, sometimes they're not. This one is turning out to be good. Not only good, but above expectation. So it is a 12.3 inch, I believe, Surface device. I'm trying to get the specs here because I haven't memorized it all. I have not been following as much as I should, but it has USB Type-C. We even say it has Thunderbolt 3, which is crazy. I haven't seen really any tablets that have Thunderbolt 3 yet, but it has micro SD reader, starts at $799. It's going to run the Core M processors, I believe. It uses a 12.3-inch IGZO LCD display at 2736 by 1824. Now, why that's awesome is IGZO is the same technology that Dell uses exclusively. Well, I don't want to say exclusively, but Dell uses in their XPS 13 and 15 line. So if you use their QHD devices, and if you've ever seen a Dell display and you're like, oh my God, this is beautiful, that's this technology. Razer also uses it in a lot of their devices too. It's a very, it's similar to AMOLED, but not quite. And so very good stuff. So they did a very good job here with the display. It goes up to 450 nits for brightness, which is, I'm telling you, very bright. I have laptops that only do 300. 400 is high, and 450 gets really bright. Samsung does insane stuff with like outdoor mode that hits 1,000 nits that would blind you. But Core M3, i5 or i7, 8 gigs of RAM, 16 gigs of RAM, and they have the gamut for storage, 128, 256, and 512, and a 48 watt hour battery. So this all sounds exactly sort of like the Surface. It also has a 3:2 aspect ratio, but it does Type-C. I don't know, it's very thin. I love the keyboard on this thing, which looks a lot like the Surface keyboard, but it also looks like Razer. They have green lighting on it, which I think looks pretty sweet. So this device is available not quite now. I think you could still order it because it's crowdfunded through the Kickstarter, or is it the other Indiegogo? I always forget which one it is. But we'll be definitely covering, we're in contact with the company. We'll be getting a review unit for this, but pay attention to this. This is one of the first times they've worked closely with Microsoft too, by the way, on this. So, but they have some smart people that are definitely making this thing. I don't know. It's nice. It's nice to have options.
Yeah, I a while ago now, I reviewed the Eve T1. I can't remember what it's called now. They had like a tablet, and it was a really nice 8-inch tablet. It was a very cheap, very nice Windows 8. Was it Windows 8? Yeah, it must have been Windows 8 18-inch tablet. So yeah, they do make good hardware, and I'm pretty excited to see them make a sort of air quotes high-end or flagship tablet now.
Yep. Yeah, all exciting stuff. This is why I always tell people, when you get disappointed by a Surface, this is not like Apple. You know, unfortunately, Apple, they get one shot basically making a MacBook or a MacBook Pro or whatever, and if they miss that, you know, Apple fans are kind of screwed. I mean, it's weird, like for if you're a MacBook Pro user and you don't like the new one, like literally the option is like, oh, you get the 2015 version still. Like, could you imagine if you're a Microsoft, like if you're a Windows user and that was your option, like, oh, you could just get last year's model. Like, no, you know, so like the same thing with the Surface stuff. I always tell people, it's like, the OEMs are making some really impressive stuff. You know, we covered Huawei's MateBook X last week, which is coming out 2.3 pounds, all metal. It looks like a MacBook had a baby with the HP Spectre, and it's just this amazing device, and it's also fanless. So these OEMs are making some really cool stuff, and I'm very excited about it. But yeah. So does that do it for this week?
I think so. Yeah, slightly shorter episode, but you know, no news is good news, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we'll be, of course, covering more about Surface Pro and Surface Laptop coming up in the next 2 weeks, of course, because that device is getting ready to launch. So expect some coverage there. Next week, I'll be talking about the Bamboo ink pen. That's their new Wacom's new pen that's available. Just came out June 1st. You can go actually Best Buy, order it online. It's about, I believe, $69. It is the first pen that does switches between Wacom and the Microsoft Pen Protocol, MPP, which is what the Surface uses. And you can actually, you hold down the buttons and this switches between those systems. So it's a universal pen that works across all modern touch devices. I like it a lot. I've been using it. Now, the big question, and I can't answer right now, is it better than the new Surface Pen? I don't know. New Surface Pen, that was $99. This is cheaper, but so far it's definitely better than the Surface Pro 4 pen. I'll say that. So very cool stuff. We'll be covering that and a few other things. Oh, that's right. I got the Brydge keyboard. I'm very excited to cover. If you haven't seen this, this is for the Surface Pro 4 and Pro 3. Should work on a new Pro as well. And it is basically a metal keyboard base that you just stick your Surface in there and it turns it into kind of a Surface Book. Now, it doesn't have a dedicated GPU. It is a Bluetooth keyboard, but it is better than I thought it would be. I'm actually really, really digging that. And it even has a precision touchpad. I love all these companies now. They're getting it. Every time I get a press briefing and I'm like, and they're like, and we decided to put a precision, I'm like, high five. I'm like, you guys are getting it. They're finally coming on board. You're going to see more companies over the next few months going, we're using precision, and I'm very excited about that. But look for that review. But yeah, spoiler alert, very cool thing. It does add weight. It doubles the weight of the Surface, so keep that in mind. But if you want a Surface Book-ish experience, will be it. So what do you have for next week? Anything?
Oh, a few things, but that I can't talk about.
So exclusivity things?
Possibly.
Well, there you go. That's all the more reason to tune in. Don't forget, on Saturday nights, we do streaming here on Beam with Paulo Acevedo doing his gaming stuff. On Thursdays, we do Microsoft Gaming Libations. Last week, this week, we streamed Destiny, which that was actually a lot of fun. I actually missed playing Destiny, so but we'll do another game this week. We give away codes then, but it's just a fun chill-out experience. That's Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We get to do that. You just go to our Mixer channel and check that out. But and we also have E3 coming up. I gotta actually still buy my plane ticket for that because that's coming up real soon. I believe that's like a week.
Yeah.
Jeez. So we'll be doing, of course, E3. Expect a lot of Xbox Scorpio stuff. If you don't follow Jez Corden, our gaming guru, already, you should. He's been doing a lot of exclusive stuff on there. He'll be there with me, of course, at E3 covering that as well. So very exciting stuff. Yeah, I said Beam. Sorry. That's right. We should be mentioning how Beam changed its name from Theme to Mixer this week. Actually, I'm going to spend 30 seconds on that. So the reason they did this was because Beam didn't have worldwide rights to the name to use it. There was also this issue. The website was beam.pro, which sounded kind of cool. But if you know anything about how the web works, most people do not know there's a .pro site thing. It's .com, and so they couldn't get beam.com, so they went with Mixer, which I actually think works pretty well. Now Mixer, they have worldwide rights to the name. They have a Mixer.com. It all comes together. So they did the rebranding for that. Also announced a bunch of new apps and stuff like that too for it. So expect Mixer, Microsoft's streaming property, to get even more bigly in 2017.
I feel like with the new branding, they missed an opportunity to make the X in Mixer the Xbox logo. It's why didn't they do that?
Yeah,
they should have totally done that. It makes oh well.
Yeah. It seems kind of it seems like right there in front of you. It's kind of like naming the your Xbox One Elite and not really making it elite, and then kind of screwing yourselves for your next gen. It's like, now you can't call it the Xbox One Elite. Xbox One X, that's the rumor. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Tune in to next week, though. But thanks for everybody for joining. If you're listening to this live, we'll, of course, do the Q&A now for the next 20 minutes or so. Sorry if you're not going to be able to hear that on the stream for this, but there you go. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Follow me on Twitter at Daniel_Rubino, R-U-B as in boy, I-N-O, and follow Zach at ZACBOWDEN on Twitter, and ask us questions and all that stuff. Thanks for listening. Take care, everybody.